Allow me to introduce Reverend John Stanley Grauel. Disgusted by Nazi treatment of the Jews, Grauel became executive director of the Philadelphia office of the American Christian Palestine Committee in 1943. Straight after the war, he joined another organization. He became a secret member of the Haganah, the army in waiting for the Jewish state, and he helped raise funds to buy arms and ships needed for creating a new state. In February 1937, Grauel was told to report to Baltimore Harbor and to board a steamship called the President Warfield. Does the name Warfield ring a bell? Wallace Warfield Simpson? That's right, that woman. The future Duchess of Windsor was related to the Warfield who had built the steamship. Of course, you know this ship by a different name. Da 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 da, God gave this land to me. The Exodus. Theme tune from the Exodus. Exodus is the book written by Leon Uris, which recalls what happened to the President Warfield. Before the Warfield set sail for Europe to collect its passengers, the crew took a Haganah oath in Baltimore Harbor. All the Jewish members of the crew used the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, and someone thoughtfully gave Grauel a New Testament for him to swear the Haganah oath. Quite unusual. July 1947, 172 truckloads of Holocaust survivors filled this old steamship in France. It was designed to carry 650 passengers, and the Warfield now had on board 4,514 Jews, crew and displaced persons, and one Methodist clergyman, John Grauel, who does not appear in the book Exodus. Grauel also secured the job of foreign correspondent of the Churchman. Now, I'm not sure that I know all the facts here, but I think that the Churchman was a very, very small circulation Christian newspaper, probably the equivalent of a parish newsletter. But what's important was that Grauel obtained the credentials as foreign correspondent for the Churchman. And this was going to be crucial when the Exodus story unfolded. Throughout the voyage across the Mediterranean, the British Navy shadowed this aging riverboat overloaded with homeless, unarmed men, women and children. Conditions on board were terrible. Diarrhea and health concerns soon overwhelmed the sanitary facilities. More than 400 pregnant women were on board, and at dawn of the second morning, the loudspeaker announced our first child has been born. Mother and child are in excellent health. July the 17th, 1947, as the Warfield sailed off the Sinai coast, she was officially given her new name, the Exodus. There was nothing random about the timing of this huge illegal immigration attempt. The Zionist leadership deliberately timed the Exodus escapade to coincide with the visit of UNSCOP, the United Nations Committee in Palestine, on its fact-finding mission. Grauel penned an appeal that was broadcast from the ship directed to UNSCOP members in Jerusalem. Gentlemen, at this time we request you in Assembly in Eretz Israel that you appear to gather testimony from the 4,500 Jews who are coming to Palestine in a few hours aboard the Exodus 1947. We remind you, no committee was called to witness the death of the 6 million Jews in Europe. This is your opportunity to fulfill the requirements of your declared justice in these matters. Witness, if you will, the heartache, the sorrow and the suffering, and the utter brutality inflicted on our people by the British. They have acted as the Nazis have acted. They clubbed and shot down in cold blood our women and children. These British are imprisoning our people in the same types of camps on Cyprus as they suffered in Hitler's Europe. Very strong stuff. You've declared yourselves to guarantee equal opportunity to all who seek freedom. Bear witness in truth to that declaration and hear our case now. We urge you to come and see our ship and to sit in judgment upon the British, who we believe are doing the very thing that the United Nations has pledged itself to destroy. To their eternal shame, the British rammed the Exodus even though it was in open waters. Everyone was thrown to the deck, tear gas grenades were flying and exploding, British Marines boarded the ship and clubbed everybody in sight. Water poured into the stricken ship, and out of concern for the lives of the passengers, the captain of the Exodus ordered a ceasefire. By that time, 200 people were wounded and 3 people lay dead. You will recall that earlier I mentioned Professor Jeffrey from Northern Ireland. He was in the news recently with a new book, which is called MI6, The History of the Secret Intelligence Services 1909 to 1949. And Jeffrey reveals that as part of Operation Embarrass, what a name, British spies staged covert operations to sabotage Holocaust survivors' attempts to reach Palestine between 1946 and early 1948. Tactics included the bombing of 5 ships used by potential immigrants and the creation of a fake Palestinian defense group. The British gave the go-ahead to the campaign, provided no link could be traced back to the government. And this has only just come out in the last couple of months. We suspected it, we never knew it. As the disabled Exodus limped into Haifa port, young refugees still capable of standing lined up on the deck and sang Hatikva, the national anthem of the Jews. And among the crowds in Haifa, watching all of this, were members of the UNSCOP committee, exactly as the Haggadah and the Jewish leadership in Palestine have planned. This was Grauel's moment to act. He deliberately provoked the British soldiers, was arrested, taken off the ship, interrogated, and sent under house arrest to Haifa's Savoy Hotel, where the desk clerk whispered to him, "There's a whole bunch of journalists in the bar." He dived into the bar, escaping from his British escort, and he said, "I'm John Grauel and I'm from the Exodus." And the British, who had made very serious attempts to clamp down on any media reporting on the Exodus, here all of a sudden the international press had this amazing opportunity. And Grauel's words were the first to reach America in terms of what really happened on the Exodus. See, the Haggadah knew anything written by any Jew on the Exodus would be dismissed, biased. They would say that, wouldn't they? They also knew that a Christian clergyman, his report on and from the Exodus would be believed, and thus it was. Grauel sneaked out of the back door to a waiting car that bore American press signs. The car passed the police lines and checkpoints to a safe house in Haifa. I think he stayed overnight with the mayor, Jewish mayor of Haifa. And all alerts to arrest John Grauel was put out by the British, but by the next morning, Grauel was addressing UNSCOP in Jerusalem. Among those present were somebody with a very famous name, Dr. Ralph Bunche, of the UN Secretariat, and committee members from Canada, Uruguay, and the Netherlands. Canada, we'll soon see why Canada was so significant. They quizzed Grauel about whether the Exodus was actually in territorial waters when the British attacked, and luckily Growl had the presence of mind to bring the ship's log with him, and he proved conclusively, of course, that they were in international waters. He gave them a full account of the battle, emphasizing the fact that there was not a single weapon aboard the Exodus. And this is what Growl said to them: I have watched these people. I know what they are, and I tell you, the Jews in the European displaced persons camps insist on coming to Palestine. They will come to Palestine, and nothing short of open warfare and complete destruction will halt them. After addressing Anscott, Growl went to Golda Meir's Jerusalem apartment, where there was a secret meeting of the entire Jewish leadership. And he addressed them on the Exodus saga. When he finished, Golda was in tears. We will return to the impact that Growl had on the Anscott Committee in a few minutes. Right now, it's time to introduce our fourth clergyman of the evening. And if Growl is obscure, Reverend William Hull is obscure of obscure, because no one has heard of him. Reverend William Lovell Howell from Winnipeg, Canada, and his wife founded the non-denominational Zion Christian Mission in Jerusalem in 1935 after he received a call from God, and he opened a little Bible shop. Last month in Jerusalem, I met an elderly lady who used to work in the Hull's Bible shop. The Canadian representative on Anscott was Justice Ivan C. Rand of the Canadian Supreme Court. I see a Winnipeg resident in the back there nodding. He's heard of Justice Rand. Now, Rand knew very little about the Palestinian, about Palestine, about the Jews, about the Jewish people, or about the Holocaust. Why was Canada on Anscott? Because Britain had pushed. Britain, of course, couldn't be on that committee, but Britain pushed for Canada, Commonwealth member Canada, to be on the committee. Why? Because they hoped and expected that Canada would recognize that the Balfour Declaration was the source of all the problems in Palestine. Britain hoped that Anscott would recommend a formalization of the restrictions on Jewish immigration. This is really interesting. Not just Britain giving back the mandate, but wanting to make certain that even if they didn't have the mandate, Jews would not arrive in Palestine. Astonishing. To ensure that Rand wasn't overly swayed by the Holocaust, the Canadian Department of External Affairs gave Rand a briefing paper. Its title was 800,000 Muslims slaughtered by the Mongols in Baghdad in 1258. You understand, of course, the Mongol attack on the Muslims 800 years earlier was meant to counterbalance any sympathy for the 6 million murdered Jews of the Holocaust. That's what Rand arrived in Palestine with. When he arrived in Jerusalem with Anscott, he naturally looked around for a fellow Canadian. Who does he meet? Reverend William Hull, who becomes his personal, unofficial advisor. We can tell something about Hull's influence on Rand from a foreword that Rand wrote several years later in a book by Hull. Rand wrote the following. It was a relief then when shortly after my arrival I had the good fortune to meet the author of this book. Here he was, a Canadian, a clergyman, a man of goodwill. Here I thought was one whom I could trust to express himself with honesty and frankness. Somewhat to my surprise, I listened to words of high admiration of the Jewish people, their standards of life, their tremendous work that they had done since returning to their ancient homeland. And here we hear Rand explicitly showing what effect Hull had on him. When Anscott members left Palestine for Geneva to write their report, they were deadlocked. No single proposal had any sort of working majority. Clearly influenced by his exposure, both to Reverend John Growell and to Reverend William Howe, Canada's Justice Rand took the initiative and penned his own draft proposal. And this proposal strongly advocated partition. In other words, the establishment of an independent Jewish state. I'm sure most of you have seen the movie or the play, 12 Angry Men. Remember, there's this court case, murder trial. The jury convenes to discuss it. And as they're sitting down, the foreman says, listen, he says, don't get too comfortable. The guy is obviously guilty. We all want to go home. So, quick, let's do a quick whip round and let's just find out. Fine, and then we can go. So, guilty, 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 guilty. And the last guy says, I don't know. And everyone starts yelling at him, don't you want to go home? It's so obvious, what's the matter with you? He says, I don't know. And of course, it wouldn't be a good movie or a good play if in the end he didn't create enough doubt among all of them that they did not bring in a guilty. So something like that happened with Rand. Here he had 10 other members of the committee, most of whom were antipathetic to a Jewish state, and somehow he persuaded them. He got a majority of the committee to adopt his position, reaffirming the legality of the Balfour Declaration, and he stated categorically that the 1939 British White Paper, which had limited Jewish immigration, was the real illegal document and the real source of problems in Palestine. Rand's partition proposal was passed by a majority of 7-3, and it was this recommendation that UNSCOP took back to the United Nations. And it was UNSCOP's pro-partition report that formed the basis of the resolution recommending the creation of a Jewish and an Arab state. And as many of us know, on this famous date, the 29th of November, 1947, Resolution 181 was put to the vote in the United Nations General Assembly meeting in Flushing Meadow. And the resolution was adopted by 33-13, paving the way for the establishment of the State of Israel 6 months later. My friends, all my research convinces me that if UNSCOP had submitted a report to the United Nations against partition, Resolution 181 might not have passed the 2/3 majority. If Growell and Howe had not influenced Justice Rand, UNSCOP would have submitted a report against the creation of the Jewish state, and I doubt if the 2/3 majority would have been achieved. Before I finish, I want to briefly describe what happened to our 4 protagonists. Reverend Blackstone was honored by America's Zionist movement more than any other American Christian friend. When he died in 1935, America's first Jewish Supreme Court Justice, Louis D. Brandeis, described him as the father of Zionism. That's a very interesting description, since Herzl is widely regarded as the father of Zionism. In America, they said Blackstone was the father of Zionism. Before Herzl's premature death in 1904, at the age of 44, he'd asked his Zionist colleagues to remember and honor his friend, Reverend Heschler. The Zionist executive eventually provided a small monthly pension of £10. In 1931, Heschler died alone in obscurity. His daughter, an Anglican nun, buried him in an unmarked grave in London's new Southgate Cemetery. My friend Jerry Klinger of the Jewish American Society for Historic Preservation found Heschler's gravesite. In 2010, he helped arrange a small and moving ceremony attended by Jews, Christians and representatives of the Israeli embassy in London, where a memorial stone for Reverend William Fachler was dedicated. Like Fachler, Reverend Grau remained a lifelong Zionist. In the 50s and 60s, he visited Israel dozens of times. Incidentally, his way of visiting Israel was quite innovative. He became a chaplain on the Zim passenger ships. And so it allowed him to go backwards and forwards to Israel throughout the 50s and 60s. He was awarded Israel's Humanity Medal, the Fighter for Israel Medal, and the Medal of Jerusalem. He died in New Jersey in 1986, and as he requested in his will, he was buried with full Israeli naval military honors. Where? In the American Christian Missionary Alliance Cemetery on Emed Rephaim Street in Jerusalem. There's a fascinating postscript to our fourth clergyman, Reverend William Howard. One day in 1961, he gets a phone call from Israel's Ministry of Religious Affairs. We have a Christian prisoner, we'd like you to attend to his religious needs. Fine, says Howard. By the way, says the guy from the ministry, he's on death row. And as you all know, there's only ever been one prisoner on death row in Israel's history, and it was, of course, Eichmann, whose trial we commemorated last year, the 50th anniversary of the trial. During 1962, Hull had 14 interviews with Eichmann in his death cell. He witnessed the execution, and he later went out to sea to spread Eichmann's ashes. He returned to Canada in the same year, 1962. When I first gave this talk a year ago in Dublin, I mentioned that I didn't know what year Hull died. I couldn't find the date. I searched and searched, didn't know when he died. A transcript of my talk mysteriously arrived in Jerusalem, and I got an email from Liz Kopp. And she told me the year, and people here who know Liz Kopp, to tell me that Hull died in 1992. And at the same time, she invited me to give my talk in the church where her husband, Chuck, is the pastor in Jerusalem, which is the very community that Reverend Hull founded. So I did, early this year. When I finished my talk, a gentleman came up to me. He said, I liked your talk, would you come and give it in our church? I said, sure. I thought, another church in Jerusalem, maybe it's in Nazareth, maybe it's in the Galilee. I said, where's your church? He says, Winnipeg, Canada. And so I have an invitation to go and give this talk to the church in Winnipeg, in Canada, which is the church from which Reverend Hull left Canada to come to Palestine in 1935. An incredible circle being closed there. I'm almost at the end of my talk on four clergymen who helped the Jews achieve their own independent state. The reason I call them God's little errand boys, I couldn't resist it. Blackstone called himself God's little errand boy. So I added the S and I said, well, I think we can call them all God's little errand boys. I opened my talk today with the Irish Christian Zionist Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson. 2 months ago, I gave my second talk in Jerusalem to the Baptist Center on Patterson. As I was talking, I could not help noticing a beautiful Israeli soldier, girl soldier, in the audience, listening intently to every word. And as I'm talking, two things occur to me. One, what's such a young person doing coming to listen to an old fogey give a history talk? Two, how come her grasp of English, and you could tell that she was drinking in every word. So of course, when it was all over, I asked her. It turns out that she is a Christian. Her parents are Australian Christian Zionists, and she was born in Jerusalem, and she threatened to sue the Israeli government unless they allowed her to join the IDF. And she is now an officer in the Air Force. And she wants me to come and give the same talk in Hebrew to other officers in the IDF. Hopefully one day I'll be able to do that. My last anecdote about Patterson. March the 13th, 1946. Patterson, who has been living in the States for the last few years and who worked tirelessly through the war on behalf of establishing a Jewish army to go and fight the Nazis, was invited to be godfather to a baby boy born in New York to a Jewish couple from Palestine. The parents honored Patterson by naming their firstborn after him. 30 years later, that boy fell in the Israeli army raid in Entebbe. Yes, my friends? John Patterson's godson was John, Jonathan, Yonatan, Yoni Netanyahu, the hero of Entebbe and the older brother of Bibi Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister. Is it not fitting that Patterson, who did so much to give the Jews a military backbone in their struggle for independence, gave his name to one of the greatest heroes in Jewish military history? At their request, I recently sent a signed copy of my book to the Netanyahu family in Jerusalem, and it was very sad that Patterson's friend and Bibi's father, Ben Zion Netanyahu, passed away a few weeks ago in Jerusalem at the wonderful age of 102. Those of you with good memories will recall that at the beginning of my talk, I posed a riddle. I read you some excerpts from a petition and a letter accompanying the petition. And so I want to ask you, can you guess when it was written, who wrote it, to whom was it addressed, and the residents of which town sent the petition? I'll put you out in misery. It was written in 1841. That's 170 years ago. The author was one Warren Carlyle, minister of the Scots Church. The petition was addressed to Lord Palmerston, the British Foreign Secretary. Remember, the writer of the letter says, who knows if you weren't born for this moment, to help deliver and restore the Jews back to their land. It was sent on behalf of 320 residents of Carlo, just down the road. 1841, 312 Protestants and Catholics send a long, detailed petition to Lord Palmerston demanding that the Jews are restored to their homeland. Absolutely mind-boggling. And no one knows. I mean, this is like, people don't know this. And when I read that it was Carlo, I assumed there was a Carlo in England. I couldn't imagine that it was our, and it's here. Amazing. Amazing. So I had to share this, this tidbit with you. My friends, at a time when the term Christian Zionist has become a political weapon in the hands of many of Israel's enemies, I see my mission as giving greater acknowledgement to those Christians who contributed to the Zionist cause. Some of you may have heard my talk on Christian army officers who helped the Zionist cause, and that's the book called 2 Lions, 6 Officers and 750 Mules. This evening I spoke about Christian clergymen who helped the Zionist cause, and that's God's little errand boys. And I'm currently working on a new book and a new talk about Christian novelists and archaeologists who helped the Christian cause. Watch this space. I salute those Christians who helped the Jews come home. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
She brought in these photographs. She said, my father was in the British Navy during World War II, and he was on a ship which called Palestine. And suddenly, shiploads, small boatloads, absolutely laden down with Jews, were arriving from terror, in the Nazi terror, to try and get into Palestine. There must have been about 6 or 7 of these boats. And he was horrified when he was given orders, he was only a young guy, about 22 years old at the time, he was given orders with all the other sailors to hose down these ships with water cannons. And he was horrified to see these poor people being hosed down as they were. And he took photographs to prove what he had seen. Now, she brought in copies of these photographs, which we have on display downstairs in the museum. So if you're walking around, you'll be able to see them. Sorry, I have my back to you here. But it's just interesting that this story of the Exodus comes along and we have these pictures of other boats in the same situation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.